Today on Retire with Purpose, we talk to a physician turned financial planner. We ask the question, is 55 too early to retire? And dividend stocks as long-term investments.
Welcome to Retire with Purpose, a show specifically designed to help you maximize your financial confidence in retirement. Casey Weed is the CEO and Chief Visionary of Howard Bailey Financial, a certified financial planner and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. He's your host on Retire with Purpose.
What's the connection between your physical health and your financial health? Let's find out. I'm Lee Kelso here with Casey Weed, certified financial planner, best-selling author, the president of Howard Bailey Financial, and also the host of the Retire with Purpose podcast. And Casey, you just recently talked with somebody who has a pretty interesting view on this topic.
That's right, Lee. We sat down with Dr. Carolyn McClanahan, who is actually a physician originally. Now she's turned financial planner. She is the founder of Life Planning Partners and integrates healthcare planning heavily into their financial planning practice. And so we had to naturally ask her, why should we be discussing our health with our financial planners?
So my other favorite question that we talked about is, tell me what you do to take care of your health. And you might have a client say to you, I do 12-ounce curls. And I actually did have somebody say that to me once. And then our others, I had one guy say to me, well, I used to be 50 pounds overweight, and about 3 years ago, I started exercising and eating right, and I just ran my first half marathon. That tells you so much about a person. And then that lets them know, if a client knows that you're comfortable talking about health, then they become comfortable talking about it with you. And the reason it's important is it's wrong. People think of it just for longevity projections, but that is only the start of it. It matters for healthcare costs. It matters for insurance planning. It matters for estate planning. There's all these different nuances where knowing how a client lives in their health history helps the financial planner do a much better job.
And this is why this is such an important part of our financial planning process for the families that we work with ourselves. Another question we had to ask Dr. McClanahan had to do with healthcare sharing programs. These seem to become more and more popular year after year, and it's a question that's been coming up more and more with the families that we work with. Are these a good idea or not? Carolyn tells us that we need to exercise some caution with these types of programs.
They're not real insurance. And so you have to be very careful. And in fact, there's been a lot of articles out recently. I think the health sharing ministries, they started out trying to be a good thing, but with the trajectory of healthcare costs, that more and more people are looking to them, and they really can't handle the volume. And most people don't understand that there's no guarantee. So with regular health insurance, it's a contract. You know you're going to get the coverage. You know what they're going to pay for. With health sharing ministries, they can change their mind at any time about what's being paid for. So you just have to be really careful because it's not real insurance.
Another unique element about Life Planning Partners, Dr. McClanahan's practice, is that they put a heavy emphasis on the present over future planning. And most financial planners are focusing fully on the future. That is financial planning for the future. However, she says advisors really need to start focusing more on the present.
If a client isn't happy now, why are we focusing so much on the future? And what I tell advisors in general is right now advisors spend about 80% of time planning for the future, 20% of time thinking about the present, and we need to flip that. We need to make certain people are taking care of themselves now, that they're having life enjoyment now. As an emergency room physician, and family physician, we just saw people, all of a sudden you get diagnosed with something. And before you know it, you're down this whole new path you didn't expect. Or people that just die way too young for no cause, it just happens. And so for people to live more present, more fully in the present, makes their life more meaningful. And then when the time comes to quit or when they die, there's not going to be any regrets.
These types of questions can make some individuals a little uncomfortable about meeting with a financial planner. Questions about your health, questions about purpose and meaning when it comes to working with our team, that can lead to some hesitancy. And I wanted to get from Carolyn, why is it that there is some hesitancy around meeting with a financial planner from time to time?
The public's been trained to think of financial planners as just money managers. And so they don't really know what to expect. And it's only the people who have done their homework and they understand what a real financial planner does that's ready to get naked, basically about that. And it's also incumbent on the advisor to learn how to have these conversations in a comfortable way. And so I used to teach the bedside manner class at University of Florida and for physicians. And you have to learn how to do a lot of appreciative inquiry and setting the stage and not having judgment to make people feel comfortable about their finances. The big difference between health and finance is a lot of people are actually more comfortable talking about their health than they are about their finances, because your health, they think you don't have a lot of control over. In reality, you can live a healthy lifestyle, but most disease just happens. Whereas finances, you're supposed to be smart throughout your life and make good decisions. And if you haven't made a good decision, you feel stupid. So you don't want to talk about it. So advisors really need to learn how to put people at ease with those conversations around money.
Well, I think it needs to be set up appropriately as well, because this is kind of a new age of financial planning. It used to be that you went to a so-called financial planner and they really weren't doing financial planning, right? They were just there to sell you some type of investment. However, today, if you want to get invested in the market, if you want to buy a mutual fund or a stock or an ETF, you can just head on over to a brokerage account, hop online, and do it yourself. In many cases, you can do it entirely free at no cost whatsoever. So advisors have to add more value. This is a great thing for the consumer. It might be a challenge for the financial advisory profession, but for those that are ahead of the curve, like Dr. McClanahan is, I think it's going to be a huge boon to not just the planners themselves in our industry, but the individuals that are working with them as well. It's not just about investment planning. Truly comprehensive financial planning and real value. If you're going to pay for something, you better be receiving real value. You better receive some tax alpha. You better get your investment advice, but your estate planning advice. You better be receiving your healthcare planning advice, your purpose planning. These deeper and more meaningful discussions need to be happening with a financial planner, a coach in your corner.
Yeah, somebody who's going to help you establish the portfolio, the financial structure that's going to deliver the lifestyle you want to have in retirement. Those are important things to have. I got a lot out of this episode number 149 on the Retire with Purpose podcast with Dr. McClanahan. I encourage you to give it a listen. It's well worth your time. Good time to think about exactly what's going on with your health and your retirement. How well prepared are you to cope with a health emergency, the tax increases, the stock market crash, all the craziness that can happen in retirement? Well, a way to find out is to be one of the next 10 people to call and request a complimentary consultation with a member of the Howard Bailey team, a chance to sit down, take a look at how well prepared you are for the pitfalls that come in retirement, and they can. And so why don't you let the Howard Bailey team take some of the guesswork out of planning for you. It's a simple meeting. You can do it on the phone. It takes about 30 minutes to get started, and I encourage you to be one of the next 10 people to get that complimentary consultation underway. Just call 866-482-9559, 866-482-9559. When we come back, Casey and Marshall Johnson, the Vice President of Howard Bailey, take a look at, can you really retire at age 55? Stay with us.
Hi, Casey Weed, President of Howard Bailey Financial. Planning for a secure and independent retirement requires staying on top of the latest trends. New retirement regulations, trillion-dollar stimulus packages, and a pivotal election year all need to be taken into consideration. The Howard Bailey team is here to support you. We develop retirement plans driven by meaning and purpose, so you can stop worrying about what's next and focus on what means the most to you today. Call now for a complimentary consultation and a customized plan of action. Is 55 too early to retire? My good friend and fellow blue-suited man is here to help us answer that question. Marshall Johnson, who always joins me for our podcast and our radio show, where we always spotlight one of those articles that comes from our Weekend Reading for Retirees series. If you've signed up at retirewithpurpose.com, then every single Friday you receive an email from us with commentary from ourselves with 4 articles on trending topics in the retirement planning space. It could be on taxes, could be on investment strategy, or the latest in retirement income strategies sent directly to your inbox. Just head on over to retirewithpurpose.com and check that out. We have an article we're going to be spotlighting here for you that we also did on episode 150 of the Retire with Purpose podcast. And this one is from Forbes, titled, "Is 55 Too Early to Retire?" Marshall Johnson, why did we pick this article?
Hey, we get asked this question all the time. Is 55 too early to retire? A lot more folks are coming in saying, hey, I don't want to work till 65 or 70. How can I retire early, and what do I need to do that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of challenges that someone that's retiring early is going to face. Right. Challenge after challenge. And it's a lot easier if you get ahead of these challenges 10, 15 years into advance. Unfortunately, many times we're having these conversations at the last minute, and there's not nearly as much as we could do if we started planning earlier. And the most common issue that we come across is those pre-59.5 rules that apply to your 401ks, your IRAs, your 457s, those tax-deferred retirement accounts that most people retire as their largest asset, ends up becoming a major liability, especially if you don't understand the rules.
Well, and I think a lot of people have just been taught this is how you save. You save in your 401k, you save for retirement. It's going to come one of these days. But that pre-59.5, now we have restrictions, we've got penalties, and there's some challenges there that if you're not aware of them, you have to plan around.
Yeah, if you start taking distributions from your 401k, your IRAs early, let's say you start taking those distributions at age 52, then you're not only going to pay taxes on those distributions that come from those tax-deferred retirement accounts, but you're also going to be stuck with a 10% penalty tax. But there are some things that you can do. One applies to your 401k. Truly understanding those rules with your 401k can help you greatly. One of those things is that after you reach age 55, if you separate from service, then you don't have to pay that 10% penalty tax. Right. And many times we find, Marshall and I actually worked with a gentleman years ago. This was about 10 years ago. And this one always sticks with me because he came in, he said, I'm looking for a second opinion. He retired, rolled all of his 401k over to an IRA, and his advisor told him he had to pay that 10% penalty tax every single year, but he could have left a portion of those assets in his 401k and withdrawn them without a penalty. Yeah. Or he also could have set up a SEP, or a substantial equal periodic payment plan, and that would have also been known as a 72T, allowing those distributions to come out penalty-free, and that's what we did for him. We saved him 10% in penalty tax every year moving forward. It pays to understand these rules.
Yeah, it really does. That age 55, I think a lot of people aren't aware of that attained age 55. Whether you quit, retire, get fired, as long as you've attained that age, you may want to keep money in that 401k to use as supplemental income till you get to Social Security, right?
Yeah, and that's the next major challenge. If you're going to retire before you get to 62, which is Social Security age, unless you've been widowed, at which time it would be age 60, then you don't have that extra boon of income called Social Security, and that can be a huge number for a lot of individuals. $1,500 a month, that's $20,000 a year. And
multiply that by 20, 30, 40 years, that's a lot. That's a substantial amount of money.
It's a huge chunk, and I think we often underestimate how big a chunk that actually is, or how big of a decision that actually is. You know, that's equivalent to about $500,000 in your IRA.
Right, and it's a challenge too, because some people that do retire early feel like they have to take their Social Security at 62 because they didn't have any other options. But what happens when you retire early, Casey, is your averaged indexed monthly earnings, they call it AIM, right? Your AIM can be impacted by not working all the way to 60, because the Social Security Administration, when they send out those statements, they kind of assume you're going to keep working till full retirement age, and that's just not the case for a lot of people.
Most of the time, people are looking at that statement assuming the number on there is what they're actually going to get, but that's not always the case. What are the other major challenges, and always at the top list of concerns of any retiree, is health care. You're not yet at Medicare age. At age age 65, we qualify for Medicare. Prior to that, we have to start paying out of pocket.
Yeah, you gotta go private, or you gotta go public, or there's a number of ways to do it. Maybe your spouse is still working.
Yeah.
You gotta look at all these options, because healthcare expenses can really mess up that retirement right at the start of the process.
Employers are more and more today, I'm finding they're extending health insurance coverage for those retired individuals. So you may be able to get it from your employer, your spouse, the public exchange, a public or a private exchange. There's many different options, and you need to make sure you're evaluating all of those options and incorporating them into your plan. And I want to tell you, it doesn't have to be nearly as daunting as it might seem.
Yeah.
Many individuals will not even retire because they just don't want to pay for health care coverage. And we so often find that you actually could retire if we just ran the numbers and did a little bit of research.
Yeah, it's not about not being able to get coverage. It used to be people had to work because they had pre-existing conditions. Well, today that's changed. It's more the fear of paying for something. But oftentimes you go back, you analyze what somebody's actually paying today, and it might be pretty similar.
Yeah. Well, and the most obvious one here is that you're retiring earlier. So that means you're not going to have as many years to save. You're going to have more years that you're going to be spending, so you're going to spend more. And this means you need a really solid income strategy, and you need to make sure you've really honed in on that budget. And lastly is one that wasn't even featured in this particular article, and that has to do with the main tenet of our planning process, and that is purpose.
Yeah.
If we're going to be in retirement at 55, you could easily be spending a longer period in retirement than you did actually working. So we want to make sure we really understand how we're going to spend that time, how we're going to identify ourselves, how we're going to find enjoyment and keep active on a daily basis. What about those social circles? There's so much to think about that we actually put together a webinar on this very topic with a good friend of mine, Chris Smith. We walk you through creating that vision for your retirement future on the lighter side of things. Not the financial topics, but those softer topics, which are arguably even more important. If you want to check out that webinar and the worksheet that goes along with it, head on over to retirewithpurpose.com and check out the webinar right there. We also have a number of challenges that we cover along with the solutions in the podcast. If you want to get the details on each one of those solutions, I encourage you to check out episode number 150 on the Retire with Purpose podcast. And I will also say we have a special offer for you today. Today, we're going to be offering a copy of my latest book, the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Job Optional. For the next 10 callers, we're going to be handing this out completely complimentary. In there, we cover everything from identifying that purpose, what you can look forward to in retirement, what's changing in the retirement landscape, and how you can adapt to it. We tell you what it means to have a truly comprehensive retirement strategy, including a lifetime of income, minimizing those taxes, and maximizing those Social Security benefits. So call us on the number on your screen right now, and for the next 10 callers, we'll send you out a copy of my book, Job Optional. Next up, we're going to be answering questions from you on dividends and tax policy. We'll see you in a second. Hi, Casey Weed, president of Howard Bailey Financial. Planning for a secure and independent retirement requires staying on top of the latest trends. New retirement regulations, trillion-dollar stimulus packages, and a pivotal election year all need to be taken into consideration. The Howard Bailey team is here to support you. We develop retirement plans driven by meaning and purpose, so you can stop worrying about what's next and focus on what means the most to you today. Call now for a complimentary consultation and a customized plan of action.
It is time for Casey to get to work answering your questions. And if you have a question for Casey, it's real easy. All you have to do is go to retirewithpurpose.com, scroll down on the page, you'll see a little text window. Put your question there, and we may call you and ask you to ask the question on the air. That's what we did with Kenny from Winona Lake.
In your opinion, what are the best dividend stocks for long-term investments?
Oh, Kenny, I feel like that's almost a loaded question, quite honestly, because I really want to define what long-term investments really means. And I hesitate to give individual stock advice because far too often we find that ends up resulting in an undiversified strategy. One will have 1, 2, 3 stocks that they picked up here, they picked up there, and they end up taking on way more risks than they actually should. Now, if we're talking about long-term investments, I'm imagining that we're not talking about retirement income planning planning, we should be talking about for long-term growth. Maybe you're in that accumulation phase and you want to accumulate assets at the highest growth rate possible so that someday that you step into retirement. And while dividend stocks should be included in your overall portfolio, it shouldn't be the only piece of the pie. Studies have shown, if we look at history, that we should also include growth-based stocks, small, mid, large cap stocks. We should have international equity exposure. We should have exposure to commodities. A diversified approach, including those other asset classes, would outpace historically what dividend stocks would have done alone. So I would encourage you to keep an open mind to many different options and maybe even think about taking an ETF approach, an exchange traded fund or index fund approach, where you're just buying an index fund that indexes to some of the best income producing stocks, dividend stocks that are out there today. On the other hand, let's say that you're talking about retirement, because many times we think of dividend stocks as being the source of retirement income. They've been a major staple for retirees, and that's great. You can include dividend stocks as a piece of your income strategy in retirement, but it should be a piece of that income strategy, because dividends, they are not guaranteed, and we have to be careful where we're getting those dividends. It's not necessarily the highest dividend we want to find. We want to find the most stable dividend when we get into retirement, because what happens is a company gets large enough. The reason they're paying out dividends should be because they're large enough and they're losing out on opportunities to find areas to reinvest that income they're producing, and in turn, they're giving it back to the individual investors that have bought that stock. The other risk is the dividend is too high. Now they've got a dividend of 10, 15, 20%, and you go, well, they must not have any place else to put these funds, or they're really trying to stretch for additional investors. So exercise caution, take a diversified approach, whether you're early in those accumulation years or you're stepping into retirement.
Well, Kenny, I hope that helps you out. Bob is interested in stepping away from work life. Let's see what his question is from Convoy, Ohio.
In addition to having a part-time job, how can I create more structure in retirement upon leaving work life?
Well, Bob, this is a great question, and it's one that far too often people just aren't asking what it's going to actually be like in retirement. One of the things that we always do when we sit down with individuals is we say, hey, what's it going to be like in retirement? Can you walk me through a day in retirement? We have a webinar, actually, that we produced around purpose and vision for retirement, included a big segment on structure. You can check out the webinar as well as a worksheet around creating that structure at retirewithpurpose.com. That is our purpose webinar. One of the things that I think is fun to cover here is to not just think about that structure, but first start with your values. What are your values as an individual? And these are going to be different for everyone, but you can design the structure in your life in retirement around those values. For me, that would be physical health, that would be my family, that would be personal finances and growth. So every day I'm reading, and I've got a schedule for that reading. Every day I'm listening to podcasts and consuming areas that I can continue to grow. Every day I'm working out and making sure that I'm staying healthy and eating the right foods. That's part of structure. And every day I have family time devoted to those individuals that are most important to me. We have date nights, not just with my wife, but also with the kids along the way. And those are the ways that you structure that life in retirement as you think about all those things that are most important to you. Personal finances, most important to many individuals, especially if you've done well, you're stepping into retirement, you want to know you're doing well. Well, you could have scheduled date nights with your spouse, not just to have fun. You have your fun date nights, but you also have your financial planning date nights at the same time, like my wife and I have. And we're also meeting with our financial planner on a regular basis to make sure we're checking all of those boxes. And it's something that I really enjoy doing. So think about your values, what you really enjoy doing around those values, and plan your days, your weeks, your years around those things.
Let's stay over in Ohio. We'll go to Van Wert, and a question from Lynn comes in by email. She writes, it seems that tax laws keep changing. As soon as adjustments to my portfolio are implemented to take advantage of current rules, Congress shuffles the tax cards again. How can I keep myself from losing ground to the IRS?
Well, first of all, we should be still taking action. I know it can be a little paralyzing when we see these laws changing on a regular basis, or a semi-regular basis, I should say. But that shouldn't be paralyzing. You should still be taking action. And what I want to do is I want to take those cards away from the IRS, because there's a lot of uncertainty that you have to deal with. Just as you said here, yeah, I want to make changes. I want to do tax strategy, but they keep changing the laws. And I would be willing to bet that the changes that you're discussing have to do with ordinary income tax rates, largely because most retirees, maybe this is you're stepping into retirement with this big old tax deferred bucket. So you have all these assets tied up in IRAs or 401ks. They've never been taxed. And maybe you're trying to figure out, well, when should I be doing Roth conversions? Should I be converting those dollars in this tax bracket or the next tax bracket? How much should I be converting? When are tax laws going to change? I want to get that out of the way as soon as possible. If I can get everything out of those tax deferred buckets, then at least that's one thing that I don't have to worry about in retirement. They can increase taxes, but it's not going to affect at least the IRA, the 401k assets, those tax deferred assets that I'm stepping into retirement with. I want to make sure that I've got a lot of flexibility and I'm eliminating as much uncertainty as possible. And that's not just about investment planning and income planning. It's also around tax planning. Lynn, I'm glad you're thinking about these things. And what I want you to do is go ahead and take action today and stress test that plan. Go ahead and look at what happens if we change those dates in the future when tax rates change and when tax rates go up. And that'll encourage you to take action no matter which direction the IRS may take in the future.
Yeah, that tax uncertainty is one of the many of the things that can come up and ruin your retirement. So just how well prepared are you to cope with those uncertainties? Well, I hope you'll be one of the next 10 people to call and request a complimentary consultation with a member of the Howard Bailey team to take a look at not only taxes, but healthcare, inflation, many other factors that can happen to really derail your retirement. And if you are prepared with a good, solid plan, you'll get through retirement much more comfortably. So that's why I hope you're one of the next 10 people to call and request this complimentary consultation. It takes about 30 minutes. You can do it over the phone. You can meet in person, whatever is most convenient for you. But it's an important first step to making sure that you are able to retire with purpose. So be one of the next 10 callers. 866-482-9559, and you will receive a complimentary financial review with a member of the Howard Bailey team. That's all the time we have this week. I hope you're back again next week for another edition of Retire with Purpose. We'll see you then.
Hi, Casey Weed, president of Howard Bailey Financial. Planning for a secure and independent retirement requires staying on top of the latest trends. New retirement regulations, trillion-dollar stimulus packages, and a pivotal election year all need to be taken into consideration. The Howard Bailey team is here to support you. We develop retirement plans driven by meaning and purpose, so you can stop worrying about what's next and focus on what means the most to you today. Call now for a complimentary consultation and a customized plan of action.